This is the Under the Ring Report. And now, the only two wrestling fans in the world who absolutely understood everything that came out of the Ultimate Warrior's mouth, John the Flesh Wound, and Cousin Tom.
And welcome back, wrestling fans. It's another edition of the Under the Ring Report. And with me, as usual, Cousin Tom.
Hey, how are you doing?
You know, I'm not doing too bad. We're in the middle of March now. We're getting closer to WrestleMania, and that means we're going to be talking a lot more about some of the WrestleManias of past. So you and I talked earlier, and we're going to talk about our top 5 WrestleManias of all time. And I know you've been doing a lot of research.
Well, let's say, 33 WrestleManias, go heading into 34.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to cover.
Oh,
and we've been around for all of them, so there's a lot to refresh.
Very true. But before we get into our top 5, I thought it'd be kind of nice to kind of discuss the worst WrestleMania. And if you look out on Twitter, you look out Reddit, everywhere, everybody is kind of under the consensus that WrestleMania 9 is hands down probably the worst freaking WrestleMania of all time. And I know you were talking, you tell me your thoughts on it real quick, and then I'm going to explain why I think it's horrible.
Okay. Well, I agree it's horrible, but it is memorable. Everyone remembers Caesar's Palace. You cannot forget Macho Man in commentary. He was kind of out of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
People are in togas. They had the camels. That was JR's first WWE.
It was, yes.
Pay-per-view. So there's things about the overall event that were memorable, except for the matches. The matches were awful.
Well, and that's my big thing. I mean, you think about it. You've got Undertaker taking on Giant Gonzalez, which we mentioned him last week. So there he is. And that's just a horrible match. But it's the whole main event that was just, it smelled of Hulk Hogan creative control. Instead of wanting to wrestle Bret Hart in the main event, we got this weird main event with Yokozuna beating Bret Hart, and then Hulk Hogan coming to save Bret Hart, and then all of a sudden challenging Yokozuna to win the belt. And he'd been gone for a few years too, went to Hollywood, couldn't make it,
right,
and had to come back because, he knew that was the big place people still loved him. But we had that match, and then you look down the line, you had Doink defeating Crush, Razor Ramon wrestled Bob Backlund, and I mean, overall, it was just some bad matches. We had Money Inc. taking on the Mega Maniacs with Beefcake and Hogan too. So I mean, overall, it was a pretty bad pay-per-view.
Yeah, there's a lot of head scratchers in there. There's a lot of what were they thinking and why and all that sort of stuff.
Well, and the vibe that the whole pay-per-view had, just because it was at Caesar's Palace, and they were outside, it kind of fell flat. I think Vince had some big ideas, and unfortunately, I don't think it played out in his mind to the audience how I think he really wanted to be. So to me, I feel WrestleMania 9 is always going to be the biggest letdown when it comes to worst WrestleManias of all time.
Yeah, the only redeeming quality was Bobby the Brain Heenan in all his glory.
Oh yeah.
Other than that, and the venue, that's about the only two things I really remember.
All right, well, then let's get to our top 5 list, and I'll let you start off with your first one.
All right, well, starting with number 5. My number 5 would be WrestleMania 20, Madison Square Garden. Main reason, I mean, the card was Undertaker and Kane facing off. You had Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle, and Eddie wins the WWE Championship. Then you also had the triple threat match with Benoit, Triple H, and HBK, in which Benoit wins the heavyweight championship. So you have 2 title changes. There was also Lesnar and Goldberg with Steve Austin as the referee, which a lot of people forget. He was the referee in that match. But all in all, I mean, it was, it's always a big build-up for WrestleMania. But getting to see Eddie Guerrero win the title after all his years in the business, I was always a big Taker and Kane fan, even though at this point in time, there wasn't the huge build-up for Undertaker at WrestleMania like there has been. It was just getting started. And then that triple threat match was fantastic. Now, all of that's overshadowed and people don't talk about it anymore because of what Benoit did.
True.
But you go back and look at that match, those 2 championship matches, they were great matches, start to finish.
I agree with you.
Hands down. Oh, and I almost forgot. You had the Rock and Sock Connection versus Evolution for a tag match. I had to throw that in there too. But I would say with the 2 titles changing, and everyone's seen that iconic photo where it's Guerrero and Benoit in the ring and all the confetti's coming down. No, it's in Madison Square Garden. It's a memorable moment. That for me was my number 5.
Okay. It's funny, as I was kind of going back and taking notes and stuff, I also kind of looked at these matches, part of my criteria for me is, there was a few points during wrestling where I backed off. I mean, we can all admit that the early 90s WWF product was pretty bad. And so I kind of backed off some of that stuff, and even some of the early 2000s, as the Attitude Era had kind of run its course, I didn't watch as much. So I don't hold a lot of those in high esteem to me. And trust me, there's a couple there that do jump out, and I'm all over them. But I find myself still falling back to a lot of the early WrestleManias, just because to me, there's a lot of memories behind watching that. And some of that stuff was the first time you saw it on TV. So the first WrestleMania that really stood out to me is probably number 5, has to be WrestleMania 4. And for folks who don't remember, that's where we got our first big world heavyweight tournament at WrestleMania.
Right.
And
I remember that.
Yeah. And I mean, there were so many good matches. If you think about that first round tournament, you got Ted DiBiase taking on Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Don Morocco defeated Dino Bravo. Greg Valentine defeating Ricky Steamboat. You had Savage defeating Butch Reed. And let's see, we also had One Man Gang, who we talked about, beat Bam Bam Bigelow, and the Jake the Snake and Rick Rude ended in a time draw. So those are some really good matches. And you also got a rematch of Hogan and Andre the Giant from WrestleMania 3. And that ended in a double disqualification, which kind of set up Macho Man, with the help of Hulk Hogan, to defeat Ted DiBiase and win his first WWF World Heavyweight Championship.
Right.
So to me, that was just a very iconic moment to me. If you look at stair steps in the history of WWF, Savage finally getting a championship after being in the shadows of Hogan for so long. And in reality, it was setting up things to happen for a whole year. Him winning that title was really setting up next year's WrestleMania. So to me, I will put that at number 5 in one of my favorite WrestleManias of all time.
All right. Well, I remember that one well. Good old Donald Trump's Atlantic City.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. That Trump guy comes into play several times in WrestleMania, you know it?
He does. He does. That's why he's a Hall of Famer.
All right. Well, my number 4 might surprise people because it's relatively recent. And I'm like you, I still go back to some of the older ones as favorites. But this is one that I was getting back into it. My boys were watching, so I was watching as well. And my number 4 was WrestleMania 30 at the Superdome.
Okay.
And that is most famous for the streak being broken by Brock Lesnar defeating The Undertaker.
That was big and controversial.
That was big. It was controversial. I know a lot of people have called it one of the most shocking upsets in wrestling history. Mm-hmm. But my other one on there, you had the Shield. They defeated Kane and New Age Outlaws. That wasn't really that big of a deal. But the show started with Daniel Bryan coming out, and he had to defeat Triple H in order to have a chance at a heavyweight championship match.
Yeah.
So he comes out, defeats Triple H, qualifies for the next match. So he wrestles twice that night. Kind of a throwback to, WrestleMania 8 or 9 when Bret Hart did the same thing.
Very true. Yeah.
Wrestled twice. So anyways, so he wins. He comes back. Then it's a triple threat match with Daniel Bryan, Batista, and Randy Orton for the heavyweight championship. And so that was the full-on yes movement was going on. Mm-hmm. I don't even think he even had a shirt that said yes at the time.
Probably not.
It was full-on ready to go. And I got to, throw a special mention in there. The first Andre the Giant Battle Royal was also held with Cesaro being a winner, which, as we know from previous years now, that really means nothing.
No, and you know what? It's a shame.
Filler.
It's a shame it doesn't mean more, because it's a really good way to put over a young talent and give them that next push, because they whiffed at it. Cesaro never really, he did well, but he didn't do anything after he won that really until he got together with Sheamus. So I'm with you, man. That could be so much better.
Yeah, but for an overall crowd and the story and the build-up to finally see him going back to Bryan win a title, especially after the year before he got kicked and knocked out in 18 seconds by Sheamus.
That's right. Yeah.
So there was a whole year's build-up, and to finally have the payoff. That was one of the more memorable WrestleManias for me.
Okay. I am going to actually surprise you and not go early 80s for the next one, but another WrestleMania that to me kind of epitomizes wrestling at that time is WrestleMania 14. Now, most of the card is bad. I'm going to admit that right now. I mean, you take a look at that card, you've got weird matches. You had the singles match for the WWF light heavyweight title. Who cares? You had a battle royal to determine the number one contender for the tag team titles. Triple H versus Owen Hart. And this was before Triple H was big. That was for the European title. Mark Merrow and Sable versus Goldust and Luna Vachon. So, yeah, most of these were bad. That was Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie defeating the New Age Outlaws. But I didn't care about any of those because the match that made the night, and for me is why it still kind of resonates, it was Stone Cold Steve Austin. This was where the torch was passed over. He beat Shawn Michaels. Mike Tyson was there. You didn't care about anything else going on. That whole card was truthfully not that great. Even though they had a lot of good guys, they hadn't reached their potential yet. You know, I can mention the names. The Rock was on there, but none of those guys had gotten to the point where they were a couple of years later. And Austin was still the big guy, and with Michaels getting ready to leave for a while because of his back injuries, this set everything up because if you think about it, after Shawn loses that title, the next night is when Triple H takes over control of DX. X-Pac comes back, the New Age Outlaws join DX, and that is the real beginning of the Attitude Era and where WWF comes out of its hole and starts beating the snot out of WCW. So to me, that's why it kind of has a special place because I look at that and it's not great because it's all these guys getting ready to become great. And you can just look up and down the card now and go, whoa, because there's so many people here that are ready just to burst on the scene and take over. And they become Hall of Famers, you know, they become icons of the sport. And that's why
it was a launching pad.
It was, yes, because that whole thing said, this is Attitude Era. This is what we're doing because Austin, in a way, him and Shawn Michaels and Triple H in China kind of started that with their little games and gimmicks and stuff. And it just opened up this whole new era that gave WWF the chance to defeat WCW. So, yeah, WrestleMania 14 is my number 2 of my top 5.
Yeah, well, and don't forget, too, Tyson, he was about as polarizing a person as you could have, and no one expected him to turn on Michaels.
Oh, yeah, very true. People love that.
You know, that was one of the better turns that you got to see because people didn't expect it.
Mm-hmm. All right, man. So what you got on your list now for number 3?
Oh, my number 3. I had to go back and look. I flipped back and forth. I had some, and I kept like, well,
I've been doing that too.
This is, and I got to think about it. It's like, you know what? This is my list. I'm not going off the internet's list or so-and-so's list. This is my list. If people don't like it, they can make their own list. But my number 3 was WrestleMania 19.
Okay.
And in that one, you had the last of the trilogy of Austin and The Rock. Mm-hmm. That was their last match, and that was, I think that's Austin's last match. You got Hogan and Vince in their no-holds-barred street fight. Mm-hmm. You had Y2J and HBK, which that one right there was a big one. That had a big build-up, great match. And then your heavyweight title was Triple H versus Booker T, and then you had Angle versus Lesnar. It's memorable because of Lesnar botching that shooting star press. We about broke his neck.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
But who expected a 300-pounder to do a freaking moonsault halfway across the ring?
No
me.
No one. Yeah, I mean, he shouldn't have done it, and thank God he didn't kill himself. But yeah, you're right. It was ugly.
If you go back and watch that match was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Even without the shooting star press botch that he had. I mean, Lesnar and Angle had a heck of a match, but the Chris Jericho HBK match, that one to me is what put it up in the number 3 spot because it told a story. They had that whole big build for several months, you know, where Jericho kept coming out and doing stuff to HBK, and it's just back and forth. And finally, they get their chance. You know, he gets his chance. He's gonna knock off his idol, and HBK comes up big at WrestleMania once again, and proves to be a victor. But even the Hogan Vince match, it was rough. But you get to see Hogan at WrestleMania again.
Oh, so. Yeah, I know. And people eat that up. Nostalgia is the best part. At that point of his career, I mean, Hogan wasn't going to be having any type of... He never had a 5-star, never even had a 4-star, but it was what it was.
Yeah, but with the Y2J and HBK, and then the Angle and Lesnar, and then Austin's last match, that's what put that WrestleMania number 3 for me.
Okay. For me, like I said, I'm going back... WrestleMania 6, to me, has a special place, and that's mostly because it's Hogan versus the Warrior for the Intercontinental and the World title. And we were talking about this the other night. I still remember we didn't have the pay-per-view. We didn't have enough money to buy the pay-per-view at that time. Usually what we would do is we'd have to wait for the pay-per-view to come out on VCR and then go rent it from the movie place. That's usually what we did. So we may hear the results, but it was a few months down the line before we could actually watch the matches. But I remember being at our grandmother's, and she had cable, which we didn't have in the country. So we would sit there and we watched the whole pay-per-view scrambled, but we could hear the commentary during the whole thing. And that's how we knew how everything had happened. And then when the matches came out later, we got a chance to actually see what had happened, even though we knew what happened by watching it scrambled and stuff. But to me, that was kind of the change to a new era. And also in a way was kind of when I decided to stop watching wrestling as much as I did, because liked Hogan. Hogan was the man. I liked the Ultimate Warrior, but I think I liked Hogan better, and I was getting older, and I think the appeal of wrestling, that was one of the last times I really, really cared about wrestling for about a 4 or 5 year period. Other matches in there that kind of stood out to me, if I think about it, you had Rick Rude, Jimmy Snuka, you had the Hart Foundation when they were still tag team wrestling. Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire, remember her? They wrestled. Oh my gosh, yes. They wrestled Randy Savage and Queen Sherry. Ted DiBiase wrestling Jake Roberts were just some matches. But like I said, it wasn't so much the card top to bottom, even though it was full of Hall of Famers. It was that main event, because that was really the first time too that there'd been a main event where it was two faces and they were both champions. And
they were both larger in life.
Yes, and I mean, you weren't sure who you were supposed to be cheering for, because it'd never been said that you're not supposed to like one or the other, because they were both built up to be larger than life characters that were supposed to be liked by everybody. So that was kind of the first time in a long time you had one of those main events, like, who should I like? What's going on? And to see Hogan, who never lost, be defeated and lose his belt was a big thing for people, because Hogan had gone like 3 years with that title, if I recall. Well, I take that back. He'd won that from Randy the year before. But if you think about before that, Hogan never lost.
Right, yeah.
He never loses. Yeah, and I mean, when he lost to Andre, it was on a fluke on that Saturday night main event. So it wasn't very common for Hogan to lose cleanly to somebody. So to me, that's why WrestleMania 6 will stand out to me also.
Well, I'm going to shock a lot of people, because I've got my number 2 here.
Okay.
And you look any list online, and my number 2 is everyone's number 1. My number 2 is WrestleMania 17, which top to bottom, WrestleMania 17 is one of the most stacked WrestleMania cards that you'll ever find. There's not a weak match. I only wrote down a few of them. You had the Vince and Shane McMahon street fight.
Yep.
You had your TLC match with Edge and Christian defeating the Dudleys.
Yes, best match.
And that was the sequel from the year before when they had their first ladder match. But then you also had Austin and The Rock and Austin won the championship.
Don't forget, though, you had the gimmick battle royal also, and the return of Bobby the Brain Heenan. And the only reason I say that, since you're talking about it now, that's my number 1. What a surprise! But it's always been my number 1, just because I always look back at it, because we had WrestleMania parties back then, and I remember having friends over. And the year before, when we saw the Edge and Christian TLC, this one was just as crazy, because I believe that's the one where Jeff Hardy did that jump from that hellaciously high ladder onto Bubba Ray on the table. There was that, and as we talked before, the nostalgia of the gimmick battle royal, seeing all these old guys come back.
Oh yeah,
even though the Iron Sheik shouldn't have won that.
He's gonna make people humble. He can't help himself. I like 17. I mean, it's number 1 on yours. Number 2 for me. I've got one a little closer to the heartstrings that I hang on to, so that's why I put 17 as number 2.
Okay. And as I said, 17 is 1 for me, but at number 2, I've got WrestleMania 3.
That's my number 1.
And see, that's just the difference. I mean, and you can flip them back and forth. I mean, WrestleMania 3, I think, was where people went, holy shit, this is a big effing deal. Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant was all anyone would talk about. And to see that, I actually think we got to see that live, if I recall, as a kid. I think we got lucky that time, because it was such a big deal. You wanted to see it live. But they had so many good matches and so many people showing up there, because, what was it? Alice Cooper was there. I can't even think of half the guys that showed up there all the time. But there was big stars. You had Piper and Adrian Adonis. But the match that everyone talks about is not Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant.
No.
It's that match with Steamboat and Randy Savage, which to this day is still considered probably one of the top 3 matches of all time. And that's the thing, to think about that. A match that happened 30 years ago, that match is still considered one of the top matches of all time. That match stole the show, and people had no idea what they were going to see. And I remember the build up to it. You know, remember Macho Man supposedly crushing Steamboat's larynx with the bell and all these things. And you're just so, Macho Man, what are you doing? And so it was one of those things. And you had George the Animal Steel there too, and his love affair that he had with Miss Elizabeth.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, so that was a great moment of storytelling right there.
That match alone is what put that number 1 for me, because I love that match.
Yeah.
I've watched that match I don't know how many times just because of the back and forth. And it's not one of these matches today where it's kick out of your finisher 5 times and kick out of your finisher 4 times. It was just straight up and down wrestling and, you know, pin predicaments. And, you know, I don't know how many 2 counts they had and how many different things, but it was just back and forth the entire time. And they had, 90,000 people wrapped up in that match.
Which
Plus,
people didn't think they could fill a building like that with wrestling. And that was the thing to think of, too, because this is before the internet, before any of that stuff. And they packed in 90,000 people to watch an event that had only been around for 3 years.
Yeah. And if you think about it, that's 1987. That record stood all the way up until WrestleMania 32 at the AT&T Stadium, the Cowboy Stadium.
Yep, that's right.
So 28 years, 20, something like that. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But to think that you have a record like that lasts that long, 90,000 people. The Hogan and Andre, you know, I ate that one up. I was a Hogan.
But it was what it was.
Nut. Yeah.
Andre was at the end of his career. You know, he only had a couple more years left, and Hogan was still at the height of say your prayers, take your vitamins, all that stuff. So you knew Hogan was going to win because he was the face of WWF. And that was just another.
Full 87, you know, that was full time Hogan guest spot on the A-Team, guest spot on whatever
SNL.
Other TV. Oh, yeah, SNL. Thunderlips. You know, Rocky 3 was sometime around in there a little bit earlier. But, I mean, that was full Hogan all the way. The cartoon, everything, you name it.
Yeah, you were right in the middle of rock and wrestling, and Hogan was the face of it. But that's the thing. I mean, you look at this WrestleMania card, so many guys that went on to have Hall of Fame careers, and it was just chocked full of the who's who of the 80s. And that's what's so cool. But those 2 matches, I could, not off the top of my head, if I have to name matches, besides those 2, I'd probably name the Piper Adonis match, the hair match. That's about the only 3 that would come right off the top of my head. But I also remember how large the Pontiac Silverdome was, you know, as they had to come down and be pushed down on these carts. And I remember the look on Bobby the Brain's face as him and Andre left after losing to Hogan, you know, just kind of this look of complete just despair. And that's something I always remember, is that camera followed them out and you're like, wow. So that's it. You know, I mean, that's why, to me, that's number 2 on my list, but you've got it number 1.
Yeah. Pretty interesting that we had them flipped, but
I had a feeling,
shows you.
Yeah. I had a feeling there'd be a point, though, where, because we didn't talk about it before. No,
we didn't.
Yep. We just said, all right, make your list. Let's talk. But it was funny that we both had those 2 the same. Everything else, we did not have the same at all, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, not even close on some of them. But, but yeah, all I want for some WrestleMania in the future is I want the golf carts brought back with the little ropes wrapped around them as they bring them to the ring.
Well, if they get to a point where they're at a building that's that big, I have a feeling we may see those come back. So there we go, folks. Our WrestleMania top 5. Feel free to share yours on Twitter.
It's been a while, but our special guest, Scary F and Terry from Rock 94.7, welcome back to the Under the Ring Report.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. I feel specialer every time you introduce me.
All right, man. So, question for you. What is your favorite WrestleMania of all time?
Personal favorite. I mean, I know that this is the most basic bitch WrestleMania to pick, but dude, 17. WrestleMania X7, baby. There is, I mean, from front to back, it is the perfect WrestleMania. There is not a single dead spot in that show. From bell to bell, man. You've got the tables, ladders, and chairs. You've got Austin Rock. You've got, I mean, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. There is no flaw in that WrestleMania whatsoever. You don't believe me? Go watch it. You will be blown away front to back, bell to bell, not a dead spot in the entire freaking thing. Even was the finish screwy?
Yeah.
Sure it was, but it was perfect. Perfect Attitude Era WrestleMania, un-F-withable. If you don't believe me, you're dumb as hell and you need to watch it again. So it's fantastic. And even the one the year after, WrestleMania 18 was pretty damn good too, but 17, perfect freaking WrestleMania.
So you're falling in line with pretty much everyone on the internet, and I'm going to have to admit it's also my favorite. So there you go.
Yeah, because it is. There's no doubt about it. A close second, and only for 18 is a close second. A close third, and only because I'm a sentimental schmuck. WrestleMania, I believe it was 32. It was the one that was outdoors in the big stadium, and everything looked like crap because it was daylight in California, and Bray Wyatt's entrance would have been so much cooler. Same with Triple H's, but whatever. You know what? That was the first WrestleMania that I watched with my son.
Okay.
When he started getting into wrestling, and I will never forget him marking out, and he sees Triple H coming out with the Terminator Triple H. He's like, "Dad, this is kind of cool." I'm like, "Hell yeah, it's kind of cool, son." I mean, of course he thought Roman Reigns was really awesome. So, but we're changing that. We're changing that.
I think he's going to have to change you, because that could be.
Well, he and I are. Well, here's the thing. It's funny. Like he was a big Roman Reigns fan, and I'm like, oh, okay, son. So he would cheer Roman Reigns, and I would boo Roman Reigns. But now, my son was starting to get burnt out on Roman Reigns right about the time that I started coming around on Roman Reigns. So it seems like no matter what, my son and I will never, ever agree on Roman Reigns. Now, I'm the Roman mark. I'm like, he's not so bad. And my son's like, you suck, Dad. He's horrible. I started coming around on John Cena, and my son's like, oh, Dad, Cena sucks. I'm like, I can't win. He and I are destined to be diametrically opposed. He and I both agree on AJ Styles.
Well, see, that's all that matters. So, yeah, as long as you agree on AJ, then
absolutely.
Everything matters.
We too sweet now. It's the best. Proud dad moment. There you go.
All right, Terry. Thank you very much, man.
But before we end the show, we've got a new segment here.
By God, it's a hot tag!
And Tom, since we've been doing top 5 WrestleManias in our ideas, I'm just going to lay something out there. You tell me the first thing that comes to mind, and you can do the same to me, okay?
Okay, we'll give it a shot, see what happens.
Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair.
Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair. Greatest retirement match of all time. All right, here's one for you. John Cena versus The Rock.
Biggest disappointment to me as a wrestling fan.
Yeah, the first one or the second one, or both?
I will actually say both. And trust me, other people ate that shit up and they loved it. But The Rock was at a point where I don't think he could keep up with John Cena. And they tried. And it also was part of the reason I look at that as a big disappointment, because that crap is what actually helped push CM Punk out of the WWE.
Yeah, because at the time, he was the guy with the belt. But yet, he got pushed second fiddle.
So that's why I feel that way. Okay. All right, man. Let's see. I'm going to give you another one here. Pete Rose.
Pete Rose. Well, besides betting on baseball, the only cameo I look forward to getting a choke slam from Kane every year at WrestleMania.
I loved when he came dressed as a San Diego chicken.
Yeah, that's the one I remember the most.
Got him in the Hall of Fame for WWE.
Here's one for you, and get your thoughts on this one. Bam Bam Bigelow versus Lawrence Taylor.
Oh, my. To this day, I was already at the point where I didn't care as much about wrestling. That should not have been a main event. And the only reason it was is because Lawrence Taylor was the hottest thing going in the NFL. But total waste, but a way of Vince to try and get people to put butts in the seat at WrestleMania. To this day, I can honestly tell you I have not watched that full match.
Yeah, I tell you what, the only reason it came to mind was doing this review for WrestleManias, and I come across that, and I thought, oh, my Lord, I forgot all about this, and there's good reason.
Yeah, there's some stinkers out there. And that's going to do it for this week's show. And once again, if you haven't, make sure to join our Under the Ring Report group on Facebook. Keep you up to date on a lot of things that we don't put on Twitter, and make fun of each other and have a little fun with our actual followers, too. So thanks a lot for joining us. We'll be back with more here on the Under the Ring Report.
Hello there, wrestling fans. This is Ken Patera, the world's strongest wrestler. And if you don't listen to Under the Ring Report, I'm going to jump down your throat, tap dance on your liver, and dare your heart to beat.
Follow the Under the Ring Report on Twitter at UTRR Podcast. You can subscribe to the Under the Ring Report on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, or visit undertheringreport.com. Thanks for listening to the Under the Ring Report.